Hey guys, so time to get started here. I'm very glad I could finally offer some good news instead of like ambiguous news or even bad news. And what a wonderful dynamic this time around. So I'll go over everything that happened so you'll get an idea of why it went well and everything that happened and all that. And just on a funny anecdotal note, you'll have a perfectly quiet day until you have the very important thing you've been prepping for to do, and then everything goes a little haywire. Right at first, I tried to get in early to the courtroom. You're doing the virtual courtroom, and I couldn't get in, and I didn't know what was wrong. It said our site is down. We'll be with you in a minute. And I thought, oh my God, what the hell? And it was 30 minutes before showtime. So I finally realized, hey, I have a VPN on this computer, and it thinks I'm in Switzerland. So it's not going to let someone from Switzerland access the courtroom in Cali. So I took that off and got right in. And then someone knocked on my door the minute we got into court. And so it was multiple cases were being heard. And he said he was going to go in order from the least complex to the more difficult. So we were second to last. So luckily we weren't first or anything. But while I was watching the other hearings, the guy knocks at my door wearing a work vest. And I thought, oh my God, and I'm really fast, saying, hi, what's going on? And he says he needs to, it's a company that wants to check our water lines, and they are kind of selling a product. And I'm like, hey, I'm in a court hearing. And then he apologized, and I took his little pamphlet and he left. Then the dog hears that and gets really jiggy and comes in not happy, even though I had walked him and fed him and tried to make him tired. He thought something super exciting was going on, and he was going to start, he gave me his little play bell and he was ready to play. And I'm like, no, not right now, and luckily he gave up and went to sleep. So then I had everything pretty copacetic by the time we got going. But at any rate, the judge started in with me. He started in, questioning me about things. And, at first I got a little bit despondent thinking, oh man, because he had to have that attitude of combating some of the points and seeing what I would say in response, because you got to realize, they do their best to do their due diligence, but a lot of it hinges on your performance in that courtroom. Because if you're not making things clear, then they're not going to read every single word of everything that was written yet. They're really just trying to suss out if I have legal standing, if there's a proper cause of action and I'm citing law properly for the Demerara hearing. But it went really, really well. But at first I wasn't so sure. So the first thing he addressed, I took down some notes so I could remember, because, even though we had to go back and forth for an hour, it seemed like it went really quickly. And, it flies by because you're really focused on trying to make sure you answer everything, So one of the first things he addressed was, oh, and by the way, there's something I wanted to, it's why I switched over to StreamYard. So let me show you something. I'll share my screen. Because the first thing we addressed, and this is something I told you guys about, but I didn't, make it really clear what I was talking about because I couldn't at the time. Share screen. Now I can show you what I had to do to make this happen and what that was all about. There it is. Share. All right. So in order to seal my record, so what happened with the address leak, and let me make it clear, the reason I thought it might have happened vindictively is that when I first filed this case, it's an unusual case. So if you're a family law type of case, you can file an ex parte order, for example, and they'll usually grant it. Or if you're, different types of cases have different things filed with different types of courts, and it's real straightforward. This is an unusual case, and I hadn't even served the other party yet. So it was hard to put protections in place, and there's a lot of rigmarole to file it as a Jane Doe, which is the safest way. So I just decided to file it as me and not give myself any problems and set the files to confidential myself. There's a risk with doing that because with civil court, they can set them to public whenever they want. The flip side of that also is that if you filed in district court in California, the first filing, you have to appear. So, I don't know if all of y'all are aware that Frank Tufano filed some type of lawsuit not that long ago. I just briefly heard something about it, and it got thrown out on jurisdiction. So it's really easy to have that happen. And I needed, subject matter jurisdiction as well as a location jurisdiction. So Santa Clara Civil with the ability to file remotely was the way to go. So I just did it that way. And I did always admonish the clerks about why I was filing them confidential, with a plan in the future to maybe do something about redacting. So what happened was, as soon as we go through 2 investigative periods, so for all that time, everything's confidential. And then all of a sudden, when the demurrer is going to be filed, and I say, and that's the company combating me, and I say, well, I'm not withdrawing the case. I'm going to go forward and object to your demurrer. Then all of a sudden, my files are public. So I, immediately got a hold of somebody and made them understand the severity and give myself a point of contact where I could file something. So I filed a motion to redact. I included California law where you can redact, and then I cited all the dangers with some evidence and submitted it. When we got into court, the judge, who is to me, he seems very honorable, very even-handed, like he's really interested in not only just following the letter of law, but administering justice like they're supposed to. But he has to base it on law. And I didn't have enough. He told me, you need more authorities and points for me to seal your records. Do you think you could come up with those? And I said, yes. So it's like, just even to do this, it's not enough to show them that Prussian's threatening me by name. It's not enough to show that Goatis Slagstens and Marina Abdullah, hired a PI. Goatis hired a PI, and Goatis and Marina are wanted for, going to someone's home with a hitman who stalked them for a good while before these crimes were committed. That's not enough. So I had to have a supplemental brief filed. I had to file it by March 10th. I filed it on the 6th. I give them the background of all the dangers. And then I had to use these authorities and points. So the one I had used before was California Rule of Court 2.550, where the factual findings of how they conceal records and the content and scope of the order. Then I had to come up with law, and it wasn't that easy because sealing records in civil court isn't easy in a weird public interest case like this. So I found some stuff. I found the E-Government Act of 2002. Wasn't sure if that would work. Here's all that. And then I found, and this is just to give you the idea of what you have to do just to do this. And the other authorities, California Government Code, Section 6254F. And you got to realize a lot of these things apply to other things. So you have to find ones that apply to what you're doing. And then I had case law. I had a couple of cases that support a motion to redact, 1, 2, 3. And they had to fit, and it was hard to find ones that fit exactly, but they at least fit enough. And then I had my conclusion. So that being the case, he granted that, and I didn't know for a long time. So that's filed March 6th, right? So I gave up thinking that something must be wrong. And so I kind of had this disheartened feeling already that that the judge wasn't going along with my legal reasoning or something. And then he did it on April 23rd. I'd given up before that, like the Monday of that week, I think I checked. So the Wednesday of that week, he actually granted it and granted the order. So that's wonderful. So my address is sealed in the system. Let me stop sharing my screen and go back and make sure I can see what I'm doing here. All right. So hang on, let me get that off my screen here. So I had a second address leak. And I found out about that one on the weekend. And I was shocked. And it was the other case. So the other case, they put it on Pacer Monitor. And it leaked my address. So I was pretty surprised by that because there is an order in place there. So that's illegal. So I wrote to the company, assuming that they just, didn't pay attention to what they were doing. And I said, urgent, this is a, serious matter. It's life-threatening that you do this with me. And it is against the law. There is an order in place. Show them the order. So they immediately took that down the following Monday. I wrote to them on Saturday. Monday morning, I got a message that they have redacted the address. So yay, no address leaks. That's wonderful. So I go into court already feeling better, knowing that that's worked out and that my legal reasoning is considered to be such by the judge. Yay. So the first thing he talked about was, and the main thing he addressed, he started with the state actor doctrine. So anybody that watched 2 videos ago where I talk about all the different legal ins and outs, the ones he picked up on, I'm going to try to remember and go over with you. So he said, how do they act as a state actor? Explain that to me, And so I did, I explained about how they already report child sex abuse material, and how, in so doing, they act in a government capacity to report such things. And then I showed the case law where it's considered mandatory. And then he got into the ATA, which is really interesting. I wasn't expecting so much ATA stuff. He seemed really on my side on the ATA stuff. So I pointed out, the main thing about U.S. citizens being having to be involved when it's an international. He first wanted to know how it was an international terrorist situation, so I explained all of that. That they're using American company to have the ability to reach people all over the world. That the victim of the crime is in the Netherlands, and that other victims like Catherine Richard, Canada, that with money obtained, he committed these terrorist attacks against a child, terrorism against a child. I went over that law. And also that U.S. citizens are at risk because they may consult with him for their health, quote unquote, health consultations. Eat meat, $200 an hour. Okay. Like how many people, if they believe in eating meat, couldn't figure out to do that on their own without needing to spend an hour with a psychopath? I don't know. But anyway, so he has access to U.S. citizens, and considering that he's a wanted fugitive and that any information people unknowingly give him, first of all, they're aiding terrorism if they find him, unknowingly maybe, and putting themselves at risk. And if he gets it in for anybody and has their personal info, that wouldn't be too good either. So I argued that the ATA is being violated. She didn't really argue back on these points. I'll tell you what went on with her later. And another thing I kind of wanted to make sure I don't forget to say, Priscilla, the attorney for the other side, when she's dealing with me privately, it feels very weird. It feels very bad. Like they are capable of making you feel, and that's their whole thing, is it's a mask. It's like trying to puff up and look like a shark and make you feel like you're a little minnow, about to be eaten. When in reality, when we get in that courtroom, she's not so big and puffed up. She looks worried. And even though she tries to be very poker face, you can see it. And you can see also with the lack of combatants on these facts, that they don't really have that great of a case. And we're talking about, top 30 law firm. And they really, because there's so much here, and because I wove it together so well with everything, they really can't battle me that well, which is amazing. And it's interesting. And I feel very different when I'm in the face of someone who really is powerful and can administer justice, and they're not against me. They really are even and equal-handed, and even in their thinking, So after the ATA, we covered the CSA. He wanted to know more about the Telegram link because he wanted to know how I knew it had sexual stuff on it. So I explained that, but I also explained that there was sexual stuff on the illegal sexual stuff, meaning child sex abuse material, on the Sferia channel that was banned, and that they are well aware of that, and that he did it for years. And then he seemed to think that that was the only place there was sexual stuff. So I said no. And in the writ, I cover a hyperlink where he probably hadn't watched it yet, but I showed the Goatis 2023 live stream. I said, this is where he is suggesting that human trafficking, best place to go get a child that's 12 years old is in Afghanistan, but he prefers 2-year-olds because they can't speak. And I remembered about the live stream where he praises Ian Watkins, who is in jail for baby rape. I mentioned that they're both wanted and they have a child with them who is endangered by way of law. So not reporting that to the NCMEC, that is a duty. They already have a duty to do that. And I once again cited the case law and the other law, so the statutes. At one point, he asked me for more statutes besides the 2258A, I believe it is. So I gave him Chapter 110 of 18 U.S. Code, if I'm remembering correctly. I had all that ready to go because I knew that could happen. So then one of the main points he wanted to know, he said, the company is arguing that awareness doesn't give them liability. And what do you say to that? So, and I got to explain about the statutes and case law, that with these particular crimes, awareness does give them liability. I also cited what good evidence we have, that it's a matter of public record that he did these things, that the Rechtspraak in the Netherlands court website where Ilias has fingered them is available, and they've seen that, and that they've seen the warrant with the court seal, and that they are aware of already banning him. And one thing the judge didn't seem to be aware of, because he knows that there was a crime committed against a woman and her child, Goatis's ex and her son, but he wasn't aware that he'd already committed crimes on the platform against her. And so that was really perked his ears up at the end there. I said, he already, before acid attacking and beating and setting their house on fire, paying to have that done, that's what he's wanted for. Before all of that happened, he had doxed her, he had criminally harassed her, he had told his followers to go and call law enforcement agencies on her, run scams to get money for lawyers to see the child, when what he did instead was pay for an acid attack. So things like that, he understood, and I said, and they're not unaware of that. And I at one point said, frankly, the reason they're pushing back against this so hard, just acknowledging that they're the same man and banning him, is most likely because of the statute of limitations on the first channel, where she had complained about it for those crimes before he even attacked her doesn't run out till 2028. So that's the reason for this heavy-handed pushback. So Section 230, he went into the reasoning, and then let's see, when he asked her, I made some notes here, but I'm trying to figure out what I'm talking about here. Here's what I asked in that manner. What about she never addressed? Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm trying to figure out what I was talking about in shorthand here. So she never addressed the criminality at all. So getting a message and I'm not sure what it is. Sorry. Okay. So she never addressed the criminality at all. So you would think, and a demerit hearing isn't really about facts, but the reason the judge wanted to touch on certain things is because in order for the law to apply to it, you have to at least, make it make sense where there's some way to know these things and they're real, And so he understood that very well. At one point, he even stopped me from having to explain it because I said something about the Supreme Court, how they want to declare the maker of a phone to not be responsible for what goes on a phone for every single person that puts something illegal on a phone. And he said, yeah, but this isn't like a phone. They already have duties. And I was like, yay, he gets it, So he went on to her, and he asked her the same things on each point that he was asking me. And he said, but what about what Ms. Henderson brought up about CSA? And she never, ever countered on the criminality. And she never, ever said that Sferia and Goatis aren't the same guy. She never tried to defend that. And I even at one point said that them doing that is ridiculous. She didn't fight back on that at all. She simply tried to say that, first of all, one thing he brought up, by the way, was that he asked if they were making any money. He asked me this. And I said, well, the channel, I believe now is monetized, but I know that in live streams, they take a cut of that and they would possibly have revenue. I wouldn't know how much or for sure that they do. And so he's very interested in that. And he is possibly going to have me add that to my writ if that's going to be his main point of pushing this forward. When he asked if I would be amenable to amending the writ to include that, I said, yes, I would. And then he asked her, and of course, she was not happy with that. Their goal yesterday, was to get rid of me for good. She said, of course, that she doesn't believe the other two are substantial enough, and so she certainly doesn't want to give me a third opportunity. She was getting more and more chagrined. She even tripped over her words a couple times. It was interesting to see that because, like I said, when we handle each other privately, she's trying to be intimidating and all of that. So it doesn't work in the courtroom. So let's see what else we have here. Let's see. Yeah. Really important was to make the judge understand that those crimes were committed on YouTube already toward the victim of the acid attack, that he's wanted for that. And that this does involve terrorism against a child, promoting child sex abuse, not just in links, but already doing it on the platform twice from 2 channels, currently doing it on the current channel and via the link. He's getting money and all of that. But he's really interested in if YouTube. Let me tell you why I didn't make that a big part of the writ. It's part of some of my law that I put in there, that you can't profit off of any of these crimes. That is what the criminal statutes were about, which, by the way, he had no problem with my criminal statutes. He didn't even ask me about them. But so this kind of ties into that. The court could mandate the action if they deem them to be doing, criminal activity, as long as I have standing, and he has to agree that as a citizen, a concerned citizen, I have standing in a public interest case. So, but the reason I didn't include that is I saw lots of cases where people did do that and they didn't win because it couldn't be proven that the company was deliberately promoting the channel in their algorithm. It could just happen, So that was why that wasn't something that I thought I should harp on too much. But ironically, he's super interested in that. To me, that would be more of a matter of when it goes, if it would be something that would be criminally pursued by an agency or whatever. But I certainly am happy to include that if he wants that in the future. So, and Section 230 protections, he understood and he asked her, but does Section 230 bar the action in the case of what about him promoting child sex abuse? What about him this and that? And at no point did she combat on those facts. She simply combated that she found some case law where, and also, she didn't want to touch my case law where they prevailed in these specific instances. She was more looking at case law that they brought up that had to do with protecting social media companies from third-party content creators. But it didn't really, to me, her case law didn't get into the specifics the way that mine did that fall into line with this case. And we know why, because those are the ones that Section 230 doesn't bar the action, right? So so we addressed my standing and my right to relief. I had a whole pre-prepared statement for that, about it being a public interest case. Oh, we got into the contract law also, because he was asking me if I had any special contract holding like partnership with YouTube or anything. And I said, I do not, only the same one that the rest of the public has. And then he asked me to explain that, why I think that gives me standing. So I explained how, most people who have channels are not able to, this will be a special privilege to be able to commit this kind of criminality. Other people aren't able to do that. They're not able to violate the contract, even just the terms of service of having 2 channels, let alone these crimes. So the kind that they're mandated to report and to shut it down, especially the scams. And he seemed super interested at the end in the scams. So that was good. It took a while to feel like I was becoming victorious. If this could have been thrown out, it would have been. Let me put it that way. That would have been easier on everybody. A lot of people get their cases like this thrown out. But this got too much going on. I even got a chance to make a statement. I said, this is a new area of law for people. Even though I've found some case law for you that shows mandated actions in similar cases with tech companies, this is still, it's an unusual case in who's bringing it and how the law should apply to this unusual set of circumstances. And I think it's important for it to be litigated. And I think he agreed that maybe it is. So she was chagrined as hell. You should have seen the look on her face when she realized she was going to have to go back to her multi-billion-dollar Palo Alto, California, law firm and tell them, hey, buddies, I didn't beat her. Here I am, girl in her kitchen table, paralegal, and she's not beating me. She has to go back and tell the CEO, her clients of Google and YouTube, that she hasn't yet kept this out of the courtroom, that they might be fixing to have to litigate this. So that is something. So if nothing else, I'm proud of that. But of course, I want the ultimate outcome to be that this is used to find him and to shut down the fundraising. So let me see what else is here. Oh, so what's going to happen is, so he asked me, I've talked about representation because one of the hangups on that, I had different people that I talked to. I talked to one that was super interested, and then they had a conflict of interest. I don't know if their interest indicated that they really would represent me, but it sounded like that. And then they referred me to someone else. And so these were like more powerful law firms. So I just wasn't sure what to think about that. People will talk to you, but it doesn't mean that they're going to represent you. So a lot of people had also calendar conflicts. And then I had the problem of, it would be really easy to get someone right where you live. It would be a lot easier, but because you could go meet them in person. But problem with that is, and people where I live wouldn't be as busy, but the problem with that is it could reveal where you live. You can get them admitted to the bar, and just for this case, into California. But that's not the best way to go for that reason. And now that my address is sealed, I care more about that. So I have 2 appointments, and he gave me until June 10th. I asked to have till May 19th, but he gave me till June 10th because of their calendar. And I said, yeah, that's more than enough time. So I'm also looking to get the amicus briefs. I reached out to Amber Davies again because now that we're getting past the demo point, she passed this already on to her legal team. I noticed Priscilla furiously writing that down. But yeah, so I had tried to get one also from the Electronic Defense, forget what that thing's called, I think EDF. No, Electronic Frontier Foundation, that's what that's called. But they aren't able to provide those for this type of a case, but they did put me on a database thing for cases that they deem interesting for someone to pick up if they would on that. So that was cool of them. I would have preferred the brief though, but I'm going to still see how many amicus briefs I could get to help sway the judge in our direction. In the meantime, since all this is going on, they may decide to do something. She even said to the judge, I wanted to remember that because at one point I thought it was very odd, and he did too. She said, and we can't speak to whether we're doing something on that or not about deplatforming him. She wanted to make it look like it was their right to just be totally private about that. But really, it's not in the case of child sex abuse. And he kind of got a little more, I noticed his tone shift when she said that. Because it's like, hey, you're not talking to her, you're talking to me, the judge, So yeah, that's about it. I can't see the chat here. Let me see if there is anything in here, because I changed the stream to StreamYard so that I could be able to upload that document and show it to you. But yeah, that's basically about it. So June 10th, we go back into court. They were not expecting that. To be not rid of me by now was definitely not their expectation. And I wasn't sure what to make of it at all either. Oh, one thing I wanted to touch on, the court in Santa Clara Civil is a very, in the past, they were a very corrupt, yeah, it's actually happening, Lethal. Okay, I got some chat comments now. Yeah, it is. So the Santa Clara court is real corrupt. I watched a whole thing before I got into it with them, thinking, oh, wow, because they had, situations where they've been accused of judges being paid off. And because it's a place that has the personal jurisdiction over California companies like this, they have a lot of people assume, and they've even been caught in, making deals to get their way and stuff. It's why I was very suspicious that maybe somebody had, wanted to make sure my address went out, so I'd freak out and maybe want to withdraw the case and freak out and not want to, have to be worried about this anymore and stuff like that. So, but who knows? But I actually think it could also be, it could be where they mentioned it to the clerks. I don't think the clerks are at fault. They just were maybe put on notice that it's a public case. So to make it public, by somebody, possibly, who knows? But nonetheless, this judge has been really wonderful. And, he does have to follow the letter of law, and it is an unusual case that could set precedent. So he's gonna, he's not prepared to throw it out by any means, but he's gonna push it forward on the right points. So he's got to look at it a bit. She was very pissed. And like I said, she's got to go back to those billionaires and tell them that she didn't get rid of me. And, billionaires at her firm and billionaires that she represents. So they're not going to be pleased with that. It would behoove them to look at what I asked for them to do. I said I would withdraw the case if they would simply deplatform him, and not even asking for them to turn him in, which really is more the point, is turning him in. And I found, I never connected up all the different crimes when I first was filing this case. It was really just about, Diane's acid attack and beating and her son. But then the child sex abuse stuff has been what's flipped this to, and the scams, to giving me standing, also being threatened by Prussian. Thank you, Prussian. You've assisted actually a lot in helping me help Diane, which I know you'll love to know. But the weirdness of that being what does it, where the more you research and the more you find, the thing about law is you've got to find what will do it for your case, what will make your case work with the laws that you have. And then sometimes part of law would be to be establishing new laws. And then that wouldn't help Diane right now. But in the future, do I think they need to change that, where it's not mandatory to turn in a very imminent death threat against an adult? I think they should, when it's this kind of a thing. And I think there should have to be, overwhelming evidence. And the company has to have had an opportunity to look at it and verify that it's real. But once ample opportunity to do that has happened, I think absolutely there should be something on the books to protect adults as well. Children aren't very good without their mother. So, harming a child is, of course, a terrible thing, but harming their mother is as well. So, that's something for people to look at as activism. And I wanted to thank some people too. So people who are doing their own activism and are always including me and being aware of what they're doing or being able to help with it, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. And some people have made content like Gaseous Snake and Machismo Fitness, where I get surprise mentions on what I'm doing, so that people of that caliber who have their own, channels where they're doing good stuff are taking an interest in what I'm doing. I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm appreciative that they care about the case, that they don't just, they're not afraid of that idiot, and they're not afraid to be on the right side of this and actually say something. That means everything. So thank everybody for tuning in whenever you tune in. And sorry I changed the format, but I couldn't show the document otherwise. And everything is going really well. Oh, hey, Lethal. Well, yeah, no problem. If you want to watch Rotten Mango's documentary, if you haven't followed since 2022, that would be a good place to start. She did a little doc, and so did True Crimes Anatomy, or Crimes Anatomy, and that guy named Victor, he did a wonderful little 30-minute that'll recap you very well on what's been going on. And and the court case started in October, and so we've been in these investigative periods, which have now culminated in they're trying to get it thrown out, and they were not successful. So we go forward on June 10th. So that's where we are. And thank you for being here. And it was nice to be able to catch everybody up and actually have something good to say. So everybody have a good night. Bye-bye.